Mara Ellison smelled smoke before she saw it. She was walking the edge of Thornwood Forest on her usual night patrol, checking traps she had set for injured animals, when a grey haze curled through the trees ahead of her. At first she thought it was fog. Then the wind shifted, and the sharp, burning smell filled her lungs, and she knew. She was 26 years old and had spent the last 4 years volunteering at the town's wildlife rescue center. She had pulled birds from oil spills, bottle-fed orphaned foxes, and once carried a full-grown deer out of a flooded ditch. She was not supposed to run toward fires. Every part of her training told her to call for help and stay back. But under the crackle of flames, she heard something else, a thin, desperate whimpering, like the cry of an animal in pain. She ran. The fire had started in a dry patch of brush near an old fallen oak, and it was spreading fast, eating through dead leaves and low branches. Mara pulled her scarf over her nose and mouth and pushed forward, following the sound of crying. She found the den behind a collapsed log, half caved in, smoke pouring from the cracks. Inside, pressed together in a shaking pile, were 3 wolf pups. They could not have been more than a few weeks old, their eyes barely open, their small bodies trembling with fear. The log above them groaned, ready to fall. Mara did not think. She reached in, ignoring the heat that scorched her hands, and pulled the pups out one by one, tucking them inside her jacket against her chest. She had barely stepped clear when the log collapsed behind her in a shower of sparks. She ran until her lungs burned, until the smoke thinned and the cool night air replaced it. When she finally stopped, deep in a clearing far from the flames, she looked down at the 3 small faces peering up at her. 2 had fur the color of dark ash. The third was pale silver, almost white. All 3 had stopped crying. All 3 were staring at her, as if she were the only solid thing left in the world. She wrapped them tighter and walked the rest of the way to the rescue center. The pups would not settle for anyone but her. The center's veterinarian, a patient older woman named Dr. Wren, tried to examine them, but they snarled and squirmed until Mara held them again. It was strange behavior, even for wild pups. Dr. Wren said newborns usually calmed down once they were warm and fed, but these 3 seemed to need Mara specifically, not just comfort. They imprinted on you, Dr. Wren said, shaking her head. Never seen anything quite like it. Mara didn't mind. She set up a small nest of blankets in the back office and slept there for the first 2 nights, waking every few hours to feed them with a bottle. She named them without meaning to. The silver one, the smallest but the loudest, became Wisp. The 2 ash-colored pups, who moved and cried in perfect unison, became Bram and Cade. On the 3rd day, strangers came to the center. There were 4 of them, 3 men and a woman, and they did not look like people from around here. They wore plain, well-made clothes, nothing flashy, but something about the way they carried themselves reminded Mara of soldiers, or perhaps actors playing very old-fashioned roles. Their leader introduced himself as Callan. He was tall, with dark hair and pale grey eyes that seemed to look straight through her. "We heard about the fire on Thornwood Ridge," Callan said. His voice was calm, but his eyes kept drifting to the back room, where the pups were sleeping. "We're told a woman rescued some animals from the den there, wolf pups." "That's me," Mara said carefully. "Why does that matter to you?" "It matters a great deal," Callan said. "May we see them?" Mara did not trust him immediately, but there was something in his voice, an urgency he was trying to hide, that made her lead him back anyway. The moment Callan saw the 3 pups, his composed expression cracked. He knelt beside the blanket nest and reached out a trembling hand. "It's true," he whispered. "They're alive." The woman beside him let out a small, choked sound of relief. One of the other men turned away and pressed a hand over his mouth. Mara stood in the doorway, arms crossed. Someone needs to explain what's happening, right now. Callan looked up at her, and for the first time, his calm mask fell away entirely. "These are not ordinary wolves," he said. "The fire that nearly killed them was not an accident. Someone set it, hoping to make sure they never grew up." Mara's stomach twisted. Grew up into what? Before Callan could answer, something happened that Mara would spend the rest of her life trying to describe. The 3 pups, curled together on the blanket, began to glow faintly at the edges, like heat rising off a summer road. Their small bodies stretched and shifted, fur receding, limbs lengthening, until where 3 wolf pups had been, there now lay 3 sleeping human infants, wrapped loosely in the same blankets. Mara's knees nearly gave out. She grabbed the doorframe to stay upright. "They're shifters," Callan said gently, as if that single word could explain everything. "Wolf shifters, and these 3 are not ordinary pups. They are the last living heirs of the Alpha King." He told her the rest slowly, watching her carefully, as if afraid the truth would send her running. 3 months ago, in a distant northern territory that most humans never knew existed, the Alpha King and his mate had been killed in a sudden uprising. It was meant to look like an accident, a landslide during a storm. But the king's closest guard had smuggled the newborn triplets away before the attackers could find them, hiding them deep in human territory, in the one place no one would think to search, an ordinary forest, disguised as ordinary wolves, watched over by pack members posing as forest rangers. The plan had worked for months. Then, somehow, the traitors had learned where the children were hidden, and they had set the fire to finish what the coup had started. If Mara hadn't gone in after them, Callan said quietly, they would have died in that den, all 3 of them. The last of the king's bloodline, gone. Mara sat down hard on an empty crate, staring at the 3 sleeping infants. "This is insane," she whispered. "This can't be real." "I understand this is a great deal to accept," Callan said, "but I need you to understand something else. Whoever set that fire knows the pups survived. They will keep looking, and now, because of the imprint bond they've formed with you, you are not separate from this danger. You are part of it." Over the following days, Mara learned that the imprint bond was rare and could not be undone. The infants had bonded with her the moment she pulled them from the fire, trusting her scent and warmth over any other. It meant they were calmer with her than with their own pack, and it meant, according to Callan, that Mara herself now carried a kind of protection and responsibility that came with old, complicated laws. Callan wanted to take the children back to the pack's hidden territory immediately, where a council of elders could guard them properly. Mara refused. "You want to hand 3 babies over to a council I've never met, in a place I've never seen, based on laws I don't understand?" She said, "No, not until I know they'll actually be safe there." Callan looked frustrated, but something in his expression softened too, as if he respected her answer, even while disagreeing with it. "The council will not be pleased." "I don't care about pleasing a council," Mara said. "I care about these 3. They reached an uneasy agreement. Callan and 2 of his companions would stay near the rescue center, watching for any sign of danger, while Mara continued caring for the children in familiar surroundings. It was not the safest plan by pack law, but it was the only one Mara would accept, and Callan, watching her fierce refusal to let the babies out of her sight, seemed almost relieved that she felt that way. The days that followed were strange and quiet. Mara went about her normal work at the rescue center, feeding the infants, rocking them to sleep, teaching herself how to hold 3 babies at once, without dropping any of them. Callan often stayed nearby, sometimes helping without being asked, warming bottles or folding blankets with hands clearly unused to such small, delicate tasks. Mara caught herself watching him more than she meant to. There was something steady about him, something careful, especially when he looked at the children, that made her trust him more each day, even against her better judgment. One night, nearly 2 weeks after the fire, the danger Callan had warned about finally arrived. It began with the dogs at the shelter barking without reason, then falling suddenly, unnaturally silent. Mara felt it before she understood it, a wrongness in the air. She scooped up all 3 infants at once and backed into the supply closet, pulling the door mostly shut, just as the front door of the center splintered open. She heard Callan's voice shouting something in a language she didn't recognize, followed by the sound of a struggle, low growls, and impact. Through the crack in the closet door, she saw shapes moving too fast to follow, some human, some not. A tall stranger with cold eyes shoved past Callan's companions and started toward the back room, clearly searching for something. Mara's heart pounded so hard she thought it might give her away. But when the stranger reached for the closet door, she didn't retreat. She stepped forward instead, placing her body between the door and the infants behind her, and looked him directly in the eyes. "You are not touching them," she said, her voice shaking but clear. The stranger sneered. "You have no idea what you're standing in the middle of, human." "I don't care," Mara said. "I already lost 3 babies to a fire once. I'm not doing it again." For one terrible moment, she thought her defiance meant nothing, that she was simply in the way of something far more powerful than her. Then Callan appeared behind the stranger, bloodied but standing, and with a burst of speed she couldn't fully process, drove the intruder back through the ruined doorway. More of his pack arrived moments later, drawn by the noise, and the fight ended almost as quickly as it began. The attackers, who could still run, fled into the dark. Afterward, in the wreckage of the front room, Callan found Mara still standing guard at the closet door, all 3 infants held tightly against her chest, unharmed. "You could have died," he said, his voice rough. "So could you," Mara answered. He looked at her for a long moment, something unreadable crossing his face. "My grandmother used to tell a story," he said slowly, "about a human woman who once sheltered the king's own mother, generations ago, during another crisis much like this one. I always thought it was just a legend." Mara blinked. "My grandmother used to talk about a debt she owed someone. She never explained what she meant. She died before I could ask." Callan's eyes widened slightly, and for the first time since she had met him, he looked almost hopeful. "Perhaps this was never simply chance," he said quietly. "Perhaps you were always meant to be the one who found them." In the weeks that followed, the Pack's council, once they finally heard the full story, agreed to something unprecedented. Rather than remove the children from Mara's care, they named her their official guardian and protector, with Callan appointed to remain close by as their sworn defender until they came of age. It was not a decision made lightly, but no one who had heard what happened that night could argue against it. Mara stayed at the rescue center, now quietly guarded day and night. She watched Wisp, Bram, and Cade grow stronger each week, first crawling, then wobbling on unsteady legs, occasionally shifting back into small wolf shapes when they were overtired or upset, always calming the moment she held them. Callan stayed too. He told himself it was duty at first, an obligation to the children he was sworn to protect. But as the months passed, Mara noticed the way he lingered in doorways longer than necessary, the way his hard expression softened whenever she laughed at something the pups did, the way he seemed to find reasons to stay close to her, even when the danger had long since passed. One evening, as the sun set over the rescue center and the 3 children tumbled happily across a blanket in the yard, Callan stood beside her in comfortable silence. "They would have died that night," he said finally. "All 3 of them, if you hadn't run toward that fire instead of away from it." "I couldn't just leave them," Mara said simply. "I know," Callan said, and for the first time, he let himself smile. "That's exactly why I can't leave either." Mara looked at him, then down at the 3 small figures playing in the grass, safe and warm, and utterly unaware of how close they had come to never existing at all. Whatever strange, impossible world she had stumbled into, she knew one thing for certain. The fire that should have ended their lives had instead given all of them something far stronger than any throne, a family bound not by blood or old debts, but by choice, and by love that refused to let go.